For my son Caspar. Prologue. Ides of October, year 732 AUC, 22 BC, camp of the 20th Legion. Germania Inferior, the 9th year after Actium, in the 9th year after the great sea victory at Actium, when Octavian became Augustus and brought peace to the Mare Nostrum. The Imperator Marcellus, veteran of Egypt, master of the Eastern legions and most loyal son of Rome, was granted supreme command of the northern frontier. Under his eagle stood 5 legions, the 2nd, 5th, 18th, 19th, and the 20th, Valeria Victrix, newly reinforced and thirsting for honor. Their number was 25,000 strong, not counting auxilia and scouts. Their destination, the wild forests of Germania, whose tribes had neither submitted to treaty nor paid tribute. The campaign began on the morning of the Ides, when the mists lay thick upon the earth, and the frost had silvered the edges of every standard and shield. Fires still flickered low in their pits. The scent of wet ash, oil, and iron hung in the air like incense at a funeral. The legionaries woke in silence, for all knew the hour had come. De Commentarii Silviani, Annales Septentrionales. The Silvian Memoirs, the Northern Annals. The camp at dawn. Teutoburg Forest, within the command tent. The Imperator Marcellus stood as dawn broke. The map of Germania, pinned by daggers, lay before him like a prophecy. A red feather from the eagle's standard rested near his hand. He wore no armor yet, only the scars of long service, marks from Actium, from Alexandria, from battles unnamed, where the soil drank freely of Roman blood. The lorica segmentata, polished to mirror brightness, hung upon its stand, its plates scoured with vinegar and sand, ready to bite and sing in war once more. Marcellus began, as every soldier does, with the tunic, wool, red-dyed, the colour of empire. Over this he drew the subarmalis, quilted thick to bear the weight of iron. Then, with a breath drawn like a vow, he lifted the cuirass and lowered it over his shoulders. The segmented bands locked into place across his chest, the sound of Rome armouring herself once more. His son Titus, now a man grown, stepped forward to fasten the straps. His own armour was new, untarnished, untested, but his eyes were dark, steady, and full of storm. "It sits well," said Marcellus. "It has saved me in victory, and in defeat may it not forget." Then came the cingulum, the soldier's belt, and the gladius, hanging at his side like the silent fury of Jupiter. At last the Gallia, the crested helmet with its cheek guards. When he lowered it onto his brow, he was no longer a man but a commandment in flesh and iron. The tent flap opened. Cato, his old comrade, primus pilus of the 20th, entered. "Imperator," said Cato, striking his breastplate with his fist, "the 20th Legion stands ready beyond the frost line. The rest are in position. The 2nd and 4th on the southern ridge, the 8th and 10th on the western trail. The men wait upon your command." "Then all things are ready, if our hearts be in the trim," replied the general. Marcellus turned to Titus and placed a hand upon his shoulder. "Today you will hear the song of Mars. Steel shall ring, and men will fall. But you will not falter. You are Roman, you are mine." Titus bowed his head. "Let the gods decide the rest." Then Marcellus stepped forth from the tent. The sky had begun to pale. The eagle standard dipped before him. The bronze wolf of the 20th snarled in the wind. Macro, the legatus, a worn and grizzled veteran, greeted him with his usual gallows humour. "A fine day for blood, General," he said. "We'll give blood its day, Macro." "Virtus et honor," replied Marcellus, clapping his old comrade on the shoulder. Titus stood tall beside his father, the lion's cub. Raising his voice to the heavens, the Imperator cried, "Ad ferrum, ad gloriam, ad victoriam, to the sword, to glory, to victory." And so the earth trembled as the host of Rome advanced. Chapter, or the goddess on the cliffs. The blessed isle, twilight Aisha, stood alone upon the cliffs, her body bathed in the dying light of the sun. The wind swept through her dark hair, tugging at the edges of her robe, but she barely noticed. She was lost in the vastness of the sea below, staring into the roiling abyss as the waves crashed against the jagged rocks. The horizon was a ribbon of orange and purple, stretching infinitely, like the heartache that gripped her chest. Beneath her the ocean was restless, thrashing and surging as if it too felt the weight of absence. The horizon, once a symbol of hope and return, now seemed a place of distance and yearning. She had always known this day would come, this separation, this sacrifice. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the gaping emptiness that had settled beside her. Marcellus, her lover, her strength, was gone. She had known it was inevitable. The call of Rome, the pull of duty, was stronger than anything else, and Marcellus had been a man who answered to that call. But no matter how much she had tried to steel herself, no matter how many times she had whispered to herself that he would return, it didn't make the pain any less sharp. It was 1,000 wounds, each one a reminder that they could not remain in this haven forever. The nights were the hardest. When she awoke in the cold of the night, reaching out instinctively to find him beside her, only to feel the emptiness of the sheets where his warmth should have been. The silence in the bed felt like a wound she could not tend to, a gaping space that would never heal. The bed once shared now seemed too large, a reminder of the distance between them. Her fingers curled tightly, remembering his touch, feeling the loss of his presence like a phantom ache. She stood now on the edge of the cliff, feeling the wind whip her hair wildly, imagining that Marcellus was still with her. In the darkness of the night, when her heart felt most alone, she swore she could hear him, hear his voice on the wind calling to her from the deep shadows of the past. Aisha. But no, it was only the wind, the unyielding wind that swept across the island, as cold and relentless as time itself. Her heart clenched with longing, and she closed her eyes to steady the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She had to be strong, for him, for herself, for them both. The letter. From the folds of her robe, Aisha drew a parchment, worn at the edges, its ink faded with time but still legible, still burning with the words Marcellus had written to her from across the seas. She had read it so many times since its arrival that she could almost hear his voice as she traced the letters. My beloved, I write to you from the camp outside Rome. The command is mine now, 5 legions beneath my standard. Augustus received me with honor and entrusted me with the defense of the Republic. 25,000 men wait for orders, and yet it is my son I think of most. Titus rides to me from Tuscany. He is no longer a boy. I have seen it with my own eyes. You will remember, I went to him before the Coepio affair, and again before I returned to you on the Isle. Those moments are burned into me. I saw him change. I saw the child vanish and the man begin to form. But now we stand at the edge of something greater. He will join the Legion not just as my son, but as an officer among soldiers hardened by decades of war. I have told him what awaits, but the truth of battle is something a man must feel in his bones. I pray he never loses the purity that still lives in his eyes. He bears the heart of his mother Helena, strong, noble, undaunted, and yet there is something more in him, something I cannot quite name. I do not fear for him, Aisha, but I carry a father's burden. I wonder, will I ask too much of him? Will Rome? I do not want to lose him to the shadow that claims so many of us. He must walk his own path, but I hope he never forgets that I love him more than I ever knew I could love anything in this world. You, my love, your strength is with me. I feel it as I did in the darkness after Actium, and in the nights we shared beneath the stars on the Isle. Your name is never far from my lips, even now, among these tents and banners and blades. You are my fire. When this task is done, when the gods grant us peace, I will return. I will return to you, to our shore, and never again will I let the world take me from your side. By the gods, I swear it. Marcellus. Aisha closed her eyes tightly, clutching the letter to her chest. The ink was faded, the edges frayed, but the words still burned with the heat of his love. She whispered his name into the wind, though she knew he could not hear her. She had long understood the cruelty of war, the way it wrenched loved ones apart, leaving only memories and letters as substitutes for the warmth of their presence. Marcellus had promised to return to her, but the uncertainty of war, the bloodshed, and the ambitions of men made his words feel fragile in her hands. Still, she believed him. She had to. Because without his promises, what was there? She could not imagine a life without him, but the gods had shown her time and again that destiny was not hers to control. The prayer in the silence that followed, she turned her gaze toward the heavens, letting the night swallow her whole. She whispered her prayers, not to one god but to all, to Juno, to Mars, to Jupiter himself, to the divine forces that held sway over life and death. Aisha's beauty, her strength, had always been her defining features. She had been called a goddess, fair and untouchable, but now, standing upon the cliffs with only the sea to witness her, she felt her vulnerability like never before. She had been the one to bring Marcellus back from the jaws of death, the one to hold him when the gods raged against him, but here, now, without him. She was a woman as fragile as the night wind, as powerless as the tide beneath her feet. She glanced down at the churning waves again, seeing their restless dance, as if they too mourned the absence of the one who had once stood beside her. Her fingers brushed the edges of the letter again, as though to draw strength from the mere presence of his words. She could hear the distant call of the ocean, a voice that felt both ancient and familiar. Neptune, the god who once sought her lover's life, now lingers, a shadow she cannot escape. But it was not just the absence of Marcellus that filled her with dread. It was the return of something darker, something older. The shadow on the horizon, as the last light of day faded, a shiver of foreboding passed through Aisha. The air felt thick, charged with something she could not name. In the distance, across the water, a storm seemed to gather, though the sky remained clear. She looked out to the horizon, where the sky met the sea, and she felt something ancient stir beneath the surface. The water pulsed like a heartbeat, something far more primal than the winds of fate she had battled so many times before. Aisha closed her eyes again, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. She could feel the god's hands stretching toward her, pulling her toward a fate she was unwilling to accept. Neptune, the god of the sea, the god of vengeance, and he was coming. She looked up at the moon, her heart heavy with sorrow and determination. It had been too long. The gods had forgotten their promises, but now the sea stirred again, and with it the fury of the past returned to claim what had once been his, and in that moment Aisha knew. She could no longer run from what was to come. Neptune would have his vengeance, but so too would she, and this time she would stand against him. Chapter 2. The Armoring of Titus. The Villa Silvia, Tuscany. The hour before dawn, the morning star still hung in the sky when Titus rose. The villa was silent, its columns shadowed in blue, the olive groves beyond still wrapped in fog. In the far distance, cocks crowed across the hills, answering one another like sentinels passing word. The world had not yet awakened, but he had not slept. Sleep was for men untroubled by fate, for those not yet summoned to wear their father's name upon the battlefield. Titus stood in his private chamber in the eastern wing of Villa Silvia. It was not a lavish room, but it bore signs of noble lineage, scrolls of Cicero and Caesar, a carved bust of Minerva gifted. By his mother, and at its heart, a low bench of dark wood upon which his armor had been laid out the night before. His armor, forged in Rome, measured by the finest smiths, burnished with oil and adorned with only modest decoration. His crest was plain, the metal unembellished save for a single etching inside the breastplate, Virtus et Honor, a private inscription known only to him and the armorer who had placed it there with quiet reverence. Titus had trained for this moment since boyhood. He was not new to the sword. From the age of 9 he had been taught the arts of war with the same precision as he had been taught philosophy, history, and mathematics. His tutor, Xenophon, once a freedman, once a warrior, now a mentor, had drilled him in both the blade and the mind. The man had fought beside his father at Alesia under Julius Caesar. There were still deep scars along his ribs, reminders of Gallic steel, but his eyes were sharper than ever. Xenophon had made him read Plato in the morning and throw javelins by noon. They had studied the nature of justice and then practiced the disarming of a foe. They had prayed in silence to Mars, and then debated whether Mars or Minerva best knew the heart of man. And in every lesson, Titus had learned something more than mere skill. He had learned composure, the kind of strength that could only be tested in silence. Now, at the age of 19, he stood on the cusp of everything. No longer the child who had once crawled into the atrium to make his father laugh. No longer the boy who had wept quietly at the gates the day Marcellus departed for Egypt. He was a man now, and the time had come to wear it like a second skin. He stripped off his linen robe and began to dress. First, the tunic, then the padded subarmalis that would sit beneath the lorica segmentata, softening the brutal kiss of steel. The leather straps creaked faintly in the stillness. Then the armor itself, heavy but familiar, settling across his shoulders like the hand of a god. He fastened the clasps methodically, just as Xenophon had taught him. No servant attended him. He preferred it this way. His movements were not rushed. This was ritual. The sword belt, the Boltius, came next. Then the cloak, deep red, Roman red, the color of command and sacrifice. He folded it over one shoulder, pinning it with a simple bronze brooch. No laurel, no eagle, not yet. Those had to be earned. Then he reached for the gladius. It rested in its scabbard upon a low stone table, black leather-bound, steel-tipped, engraved with Roman figures in battle. The blade had been forged in Rome by his father's own commission, and presented to him on his 15th birthday in the courtyard of Villa Silvia. He remembered the moment, Marcellus standing tall, a faint smile beneath his stern gaze. "This is yours now," he had said. "Guard it well." Titus drew it slowly, reverently. The steel caught the morning light, clean and merciless. On the blade, etched deep and permanent, Virtus et Honor. And around the hilt, in ancient lettering he had traced with his fingers 100 times, Titus Marcellus. It was not just a sword, it was legacy made metal, the extension of his father's will, and now of his own. He held it for a moment longer, the way a priest might hold a relic, then slid it into the baldric at his side. It hung perfectly, balanced, ready. Finally he reached for his helmet, plumed but modest. He held it beneath his arm and turned to face the high bronze mirror at the back of the chamber. And for a moment he paused, not because he looked unfamiliar, but because, almost with a shock, he suddenly recognized himself. The softness in his face was still there, his mouth, his olive skin, his mother's features. But the jaw was square now, the brow steady and determined. All Marcellus, and his eyes. Those were his father's, dark, commanding, profound. There was discipline there, composure. The restless fire of youth had tempered into something older, something still and deep. A knock at the chamber door. It opened quietly. "Dominus," came the voice of Xenophon. "Your horse is ready. The camp awaits. Rome awaits." Titus turned and gave a single nod. "I will be down shortly." The old Greek lingered, looking at the young man before him, as if seeing something sacred. Then he bowed, not as a tutor, but as a soldier. "Your father will be proud," he said. "So is your mother, wherever she now walks among the stars." Titus said nothing. His throat tightened. When Xenophon left, Titus crossed to the window and opened the shutters. The sky was bleeding gold now. The sun had broken. He looked out over the olive groves. In the distance, the Tuscan hills curved like ancient shields. This land had nurtured him, protected him. But now it was time to leave it behind. He walked to the corner of the room where a chest lay partially open. Inside were a few belongings, scrolls, a small wooden figure of Mars Ultor, a dagger given to him by his uncle when he turned 15, his father's letter, sent 6 years earlier, just before the sea battle at Actium. Marcellus Quintus Silvianus to his beloved son Titus. Greetings. Forgive me, my son, for such an unforgivable delay in writing. Know, however, that you are never far from my thoughts. He held it reverently, the parchment worn, the ink faded but still legible, each word burning as brightly now as when they were first written. It was not just a letter, it was his father's soul, poured onto parchment, sealed with duty and love. Titus knew the contents by heart, but he read it again, as if drawing strength from the very hand that had penned it. Then, slowly, he folded it and slipped it into the lining of his tunic, pressing it flat beneath the breastplate, directly over his heart. The past and the present had become one. Outside, the servants lined the colonnade. They did not speak, they only bowed. Xenophon waited by the great arch, holding the reins of his horse. It was a fine beast, black, strong, bred for war. It stamped impatiently. Titus took the reins, mounted in one motion, and turned the horse toward the road that would carry him to Rome. No farewell, no tear, just the crunch of hooves and the rising wind. As he rode, the banner of the 20th Legion stirred in the saddlebag behind him, and far across the land 5 legions stirred beneath the dawn. Chapter 3. The camp of eagles via Claudia, approaching the outskirts of Rome, dusk Titus had ridden since dawn. He had set out while the mists still clung to the olive trees of Tuscany, riding hard beneath the paling stars, his breath misting in the cold morning air. The villa, his childhood, his peace, was far behind him now. With each mile his thoughts sharpened like a blade under whetstone. The road had changed as the hours passed, from dew-soaked fields and quiet groves to open plains where the scent of dust and civilization began to mingle. Wayfarers passed him. Merchants with carts, soldiers on foot, peasants with flocks, all made way for the rider in crimson, astride a black stallion whose hooves hammered the old stones of the Via Claudia like war drums. It was nearly dusk when Titus saw the first signs of the camp. Smoke curled lazily against the dying sky, glints of metal, winked through the haze. The castra, Rome's war machine, unfurled before him like a beast in repose. 5 legions had assembled on the flatlands outside the old walls of Rome, summoned by Augustus himself. Their standards caught the fading light, golden and brazen eagles rearing toward the heavens. The encampment stretched as far as the eye could see, rows upon rows of tents in perfect formation, lines of supply carts and siege engines, soldiers drilling in the evening glow. Even at this hour the camp buzzed with motion. Hammers rang from the smithies, men shouted over the neighing of horses, and centurions barked orders that echoed down the avenues like thunderclaps. At its heart, beneath the black and crimson banner of Legio Daxinx Valeria Victrix, stood Marcellus. He was not armored, but the red tunic he wore seemed stitched from command itself. His hair bore streaks of iron now, his jaw firmer, but his bearing had not changed since the day he had ridden into Egypt at Caesar's command. He stood beside the parade ground, watching as men half his age struggled to match the precision his veterans had drilled into their bones. Then he turned. He felt it. A rhythm in the earth, the approach of something known. The dust parted. Titus. The young man's silhouette cut sharply against the last flare of daylight. His cloak snapped behind him like a standard in wind. He rode not like a boy, but like a leader born. He did not slow until he reached the edge of the drill field, then dismounted in one fluid motion and stood, helm beneath his arm, armor aglow in the sunset. He came to attention, his fist striking his breastplate. "Ave Imperator," he said. "I stand at your command." Marcellus did not move at once. He looked his son up and down. He had been a young man last time they stood face to face. Now here stood a warrior in the making. "You came," he said. Titus inclined his head, gaze steady. "You summoned me, Imperator, and I come as your officer, your son, your sword." Marcellus stepped forward. There was no sentiment in his embrace, only pride, like tempered steel. He clasped Titus's shoulders, and for a heartbeat father and son stood as one. "Legio Daxinx awaits you," he said. "They will not care for your name. They will weigh your worth in silence and steel. Are you ready?" Titus looked beyond his father to the legionaries assembled, faces scored by time, arms thick with scars, the men of Actium, of Pharsalus, of Philippi. They watched him with the unyielding stillness of wolves. "I am ready," Titus said. "Though I have not yet seen war, I know its shadow. I have trained beneath the man who walked through it and mastered it." Marcellus gave the ghost of a smile. "War doesn't care for words," he said. "Then I will let my sword speak," Titus replied, evenly looking at his father. Marcellus considered his son carefully for a moment. Then he turned to his aide. "Fetch the commanders, and send for the Primus Pilus. Let them see the son of Marcellus with their own eyes." As the aide strode away, Titus and Marcellus walked together down the central avenue. Men straightened, whispers stirred, salutes followed. "You must walk with me now," Marcellus said quietly, "not as my blood, but as a Roman officer. They must see not the boy, but the man, not my heir, but a soldier." Titus gave a single nod. They passed the standard of the 20th, the great eagle standard of the 20th, glinting gold in the last of the light. Titus felt the weight of every glance. They did not see a boy, they saw a name, and names alone did not hold the line. And then a cry rose up from one of the scouts. Above, every eye turned skyward, and there it was, a single eagle, wings vast and golden in the sun's last breath, circled high above the camp. It hovered, just for a moment, poised in the air as if weighing the world beneath it. Then it tilted its wings and turned, eastward, toward the coming storm, toward Germania.